Frank handed back the boy's line. Easy does it, the sea's a patient teacher. Suddenly music thundered. Frank turned a yacht storm through. Hey, watch it. Wood cracked, water surged. Frank clutched the flag from the waves as voices jeered. Just retire, old man. But by dawn 6, Navy ships lined the harbor. Admiral Grant's voice cut through the hush. Chief McAllister, today we honor you. Frank faced the crowd flag over his heart as sailors snapped to salute. Frank McAllister rose before dawn just as he had for decades. At 74, his knees ached and his back reminded him of every year he'd lived. But his hands were still steady, his mind still sharp. In Havenport, Maine, a small fishing town tucked along the Atlantic coast, Frank was as familiar as the lighthouse or the old dock pilings part of the landscape, but easy to overlook. His modest white cottage sat on a rise above the harbor, a short walk down a gravel path to the water. The front porch had a rocking chair, a faded doormat, and a flagpole, where the American flag always flew rain or shine. That flag had meaning. Frank had been a Navy man serving during the Korean War. He didn't speak much about those years, but the habits they shaped never left him up early. Work with your hands, respect the sea. On this particular morning, Frank moved through his routine without hurry. Coffee in the thermos bait bucket, ready, an old cap pulled down over his thinning hair. As he reached the docks, the air was crisp with the bite of salt and morning mist. The world felt hushed as if holding its breath. Near the bait shack, he spotted young Tommy Martin, struggling with a fishing line, his small hands fumbling with a stubborn knot. Morning, Tommy, Frank called out, voice gravelly but kind. Looks like that line's got you beat. Tommy turned cheeks red. Yeah, Mr. Frank, I just can't get it. Frank crouched beside him, weathered fingers moving with practiced ease. Here's the trick, son. You loop it like this. See? Then pull it through here. She'll hold fast. Tommy's face lit up as the knot came free. Thanks, Mr. Frank. Frank gave a small nod and moved on down the dock. That was Frank, a man of few words, simple gestures, and quiet help. His boat, the Harbor Angel, waited at the end of the dock. She wasn't much to look at, faded paint, weathered wood, but every inch of her was built by Frank's own hands. After the war, when his head was full of noise, he couldn't quiet. The boat gave him something steady to hold on to. She wasn't just a vessel. She was his peace. Frank climbed aboard, checked his traps, and prepared to push off. As the sun cracked the horizon, painting the sky in pink and gold, he let the familiar peace settle over him. The water lapped gently at the hull. The world for a moment was right, but moments like that don't always last. A low rumble reached his ears, a vibration beneath his feet. Frank turned, frowning, scanning the water. Around the bend came Silver Arrow, the newest and flashiest yacht in Havenport. She gleamed like a spaceship cutting through the harbor as if it belonged to her. On the upper deck, a crowd of young people laughed, music thumping, champagne glasses flashing in the morning sun. Frank's stomach tightened. He'd seen that yacht before. Eli Grayson's, the tech billionaire, who'd recently bought up the biggest beachfront property in town. Grayson was the talk of Havenport. Rich, young, reckless locals grumbled that the town was changing, turning into a playground for the wealthy. Frank usually paid it no mind, but today it was headed straight for him. Frank raised his arms, waving both hands. Hey, watch it! He called, his voice lost in the roar of engines and music. The Harbor Angel bobbed helplessly in the waves, kicked up by the yacht. Frank's heart pounded. He tried to reverse, but the old engine coughed and sputtered. His fingers tightened on the wheel. The yacht showed no sign of slowing. With a sickening crack, steel met wood. Frank was thrown sideways as the Silver Arrow sliced through the stern of his boat. He scrambled, leaping for the dock, just as his boat splintered beneath him. The American flag he'd flown on the stern every day for 40 years tore free, tumbling into the churning sea. On the deck above, a voice called out, light with laughter. It's just an old boat, man. Frank lay on the dock for a moment, catching his breath. His knees throbbed, his shoulder ached, but his eyes stayed fixed on the water. He saw the flash of red, white, and blue as the flag drifted between the shattered boards. Slowly, he pulled himself up, limped to the edge of the dock, and reached down. His hand closed around the wet fabric, and for a long moment, he just stood there, holding it tight against his chest. Around him, people had gathered: joggers, tourists, dock workers. Some filmed with their phones. No one stepped forward. That evening back at his cottage, Frank sat at his kitchen table. The flag spread before him, its fabric still damp. His grandson David had driven in from Boston after hearing the news. "You have to do something," Grandpa David said, pacing the small room. "This guy just ran you over like you're nothing. We should call a lawyer, the media, whatever it takes." Frank looked down at the flag, running a callous thumb over the stars. "It's just a boat, David." "But you built that boat." Frank's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "It mattered to me." Outside, the Silver Arrow glittered under party lights, music still drifting over the water. Frank turned off the lamp, watching the last glow fade from the harbor, and wondered what kind of world he was waking up to in the morning. The next morning, Havenport stirred to life under a pale cloud-streaked sky. Lobster boats pushed off from the docks, tourists with coffee cups strolled the waterfront, and seagulls screeched overhead. From the outside, it was an ordinary day, but for Frank McAllister, the world felt hollow. He stood on his porch, coffee cooling in his hands, his eyes fixed on the empty slip where the harbor angel had once floated. 40 years of work, memory, and quiet comfort gone in the snap of a yacht's wake and the careless laughter of strangers. He barely noticed David pull up in his car, the tires crunching on gravel. His grandson stepped out, phone in hand, brows furrowed. Grandpa David said, walking up the steps, "Have you seen this?" Frank shook his head without looking. David held up his phone. On the screen played a shaky video, the moment of impact. Frank's frantic wave, the harbor angel shattering like matchsticks, and finally Frank kneeling on the dock, pulling his wet flag from the sea. The title read, "Old Man Loses Boat to Yacht, LOL. It's everywhere. Grandpa, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter. People are laughing at you." David's voice was tight with frustration. "Look at these comments. Should have retired the boat years ago. Boomer wreck. Who let Grandpa near the water?" "It's disgusting," Frank gave a slow shrug. "It's just noise, David." "Let it pass," but David shook his head. "No, this isn't right. We need to call someone. The news, a lawyer, that billionaire should pay for what he did." Frank walked down the steps and toward the water's edge, the morning breeze tugging at his jacket. "It was just a boat," he said quietly. "That's not the point," David followed behind. "It's about respect, about what's fair." At the harbor, the usual faces went about their routines. Fishermen unloaded traps, tourists posed for photos, but here and there people glanced at Frank, some with pity, some with embarrassment, and a few with the blank detached curiosity of those who'd seen him only through a screen. Frank passed the marina office where Jim, the harbor master, stood, clipboard in hand. Jim began shifting uncomfortably. "I talked to insurance this morning. They're saying the harbor angel wasn't up to modern safety codes. No radar reflectors, no navigation lights, you know how they are. They're calling it a total loss, no coverage." Frank gave a small nod. "I figured. I'm real sorry." Jim added, "If there's anything I can do." "Thanks, Jim. You've done enough." Frank walked to the edge of the dock, resting his hands on the railing, looking out over the harbor. Across the water, the Silver Arrow gleamed under the morning sun, the clink of champagne glasses and distant laughter floating on the breeze. Music thumped faintly, "Another party, another day" to Eli Grayson. It was just a weekend. To Frank, it was the end of a chapter. That evening, Frank sat at his kitchen table, the house quiet except for the tick of an old wall clock. Before him lay the logbook he'd kept for 4 decades. Weather notes, tides, catch records, small moments recorded for no one but himself. His pen hovered over the page, then slowly moved. "First day without harbor. Angel feels wrong." He closed the book, resting his hands atop it. On the shelf above the table sat a wooden chest, his navy chest worn and scratched from years of moves, deployments, and memories best left untouched. Frank reached up, drew it down, and lifted the lid. Inside lay medals he rarely showed, photographs of young faces frozen in time, and at the bottom carefully folded his retirement flag. As his fingers traced the cloth, headlights swept across the window. David let himself in, dropping into the chair opposite. "Grandpa," David said softly, "you don't have to just—" "Take this." Frank looked up, his eyes steady. "David, I spent my life making peace with things I couldn't change. But this," David clenched his fists on the table, "this isn't just some accident. That man wrecked your boat. He humiliated you. He should pay." Frank leaned back, exhaling slowly. What would it fix? A new boat wouldn't bring back the mornings on the water, wouldn't bring back the men in those pictures. It was never just the boat, David. The younger man sat in silence, his anger simmering just below the surface. Finally, he asked, "Do you regret not leaving this town?" Frank gave the faintest of smiles. "I don't regret the town, son. I regret that it forgot how to listen." Outside the harbor, lights flickered to life, casting rippling reflections across the water. Music still pulsed from the Silver Arrow and laughter drifted faintly through the night. Frank stood, walked to the porch, and leaned against the railing, looking out across the dark water. Behind him, David remained at the table, watching his grandfather's quiet silhouette against the night. Neither of them spoke, but both sensed it. The town, the moment, the weight of something larger, gathering just beyond the horizon. The next morning, Havenport woke to an unusual stillness. A thick fog hung over the harbor, softening the outlines of boats and buildings. Frank stood on his porch as always, a mug of coffee warming his hands, watching the gray curtain where the sea met the sky. Since losing the harbor angel, he'd kept the same routine out of habit, rising before dawn, standing on the porch waiting for something that no longer came. He wasn't sure what caught his attention first, the deep rolling sound of foghorns or the sudden hush that fell over the town. Frank's brow furrowed as he stepped to the edge of his porch, squinting toward the water. From within the mist shapes emerged massive, steady, unmistakable, one by one 6 U.S. Navy ships, cut through the fog, moving in perfect formation into the harbor. Word spread like wildfire. Shopkeepers flipped their signs to closed and rushed to the docks. Tourists paused mid-step, drawn by the sight of steel hulls and flags at half-mast. Children were pulled close by parents who sensed something important unfolding. Frank watched from his porch, puzzled heart beginning to pound. There were no military exercises planned, no dignitaries visiting, nothing to explain why the Navy had come to their quiet little town. On the lead ship, a guided missile destroyer, the crew lined the deck, standing at attention. At the rail stood Rear Admiral Susan Grant, her white uniform sharp even in the dim light, her face composed, as she held a folded American flag. Frank felt his chest tighten. He knew that fold. He'd performed it himself years ago, after funerals, after losses at sea. It was the fold given to honor the fallen, the fold presented to the families of those who never made it home. Slowly, Frank set his coffee aside, his old instincts stirring. He moved down the porch steps, his cane tapping lightly on the wooden boards, and began the walk to the harbor. The crowd parted without a word, letting him pass, their eyes following him as realization rippled through them. At the water's edge, Admiral Grant stepped ashore, flanked by a formal color guard. The sailors on all 6 vessels remained at attention, their gazes fixed on the shore. Chief Petty Officer McAllister, the admiral, called, her voice steady and clear across the still harbor. "Permission to come ashore and render honors." Frank stopped, shoulders pulling back, the years falling away in a heartbeat. He raised a hand in a crisp salute. "Permission granted, Admiral." The admiral and her guard approached, the sound of their footsteps sharp against the old wooden dock. She stopped before Frank, presenting the folded flag with both hands. "Chief McAllister," she said, addressing not only Frank, but the watching crowd. 43 years ago, you saved the lives of over 100 sailors aboard the USS Providence when a coolant line ruptured during a storm. You refused commendations. You asked only that your brothers be remembered. A murmur moved through the onlookers. Faces turned toward Frank, seeing him, not just as the old fisherman on the docks, but as something more, a man. They'd overlooked a hero hidden in plain sight. "Yesterday, the Admiral continued your vessel. The harbor angel was destroyed. No assistance was offered. No respect was shown. Today, the United States Navy has come to acknowledge that your service did not end when you left uniform, and that your sacrifice has not gone unnoticed." The crowd was silent, a stillness more profound than any Frank had ever known in Havenport. Even from across the water, the Silver Arrow had gone quiet, its passengers gathered at the rail, watching in uneasy silence. A young sailor stepped forward, carrying a polished wooden plaque. He handed it to Frank with a respectful bow. Frank's fingers brushed the brass plate, reading the inscription. "For the man who kept the sea safe even after service. The United States Navy does not forget its own." For a moment, Frank could only stare at the plaque, the flag, the admiral before him. His throat tightened as he cleared it softly. "Thank you, Admiral, Admiral." Grant offered a small, solemn nod. "We heard about what happened," she said in a quieter voice, "from your grandson. He reached out to the Navy Alumni Association." Frank glanced back and spotted David near the crowd, eyes bright, a faint smile on his face. Frank's chest tightened again, though this time it wasn't pain but something warmer. The Admiral's voice softened even further. "You should have called us." Chief Frank gave a slight tired smile. "Didn't think it was your problem, ma'am." "It was never just a boat," she replied gently, "and you were never just a sailor." As the color guard raised their flags, as the sailors aboard the ships snapped to salute, as the townspeople lowered their phones and raised their heads, Frank stood at the center of it all, an old man made visible, his life's quiet service finally honored. For the first time in years, the docks of Havenport were quiet. The Navy ships with flags still at half-mast remained anchored in a solemn line across the harbor. Families stood shoulder to shoulder, old fishermen pulled off their caps, and even the tourists had set down their cameras. Frank McAllister remained near the water's edge. The folded flag pressed to his chest, the plaque cradled carefully in his arm. For a moment, no one approached him. People simply watched, unsure how to bridge the gap between a man they'd known only as the old fisherman and the hero now standing before them. Then a voice broke the stillness. "Mr. McAllister." Frank turned to see the harbor master, Jim, stepping forward, his cap in hand. "Frank, we'd like you to have a permanent slip at the marina free of charge for any vessel you choose." Jim's voice caught slightly as he added, "We should have seen you better, friend." Frank gave a small nod. "Thank you, Jim." Others came forward. The bakery owner, the bait shop, clerk, fishermen from both ends of the harbor. One by one, they extended hands, words, small offers of help. Kids clustered at the edge of the dock, wide-eyed, watching as if Frank had stepped out of one of the history books they barely paid attention to in school. David made his way through the crowd, coming to stand beside his grandfather. "Told you it mattered," he murmured. Frank didn't answer right away. His eyes swept across the faces around him, then out over the water, where the silver arrow still floated, an island of awkward stillness amid the growing murmur on shore. And then, to Frank's surprise, Eli Grayson himself appeared at the dock. Gone was the confident swagger, the easy grin. Eli approached slowly, hands jammed into the pockets of his designer jeans, his sunglasses pushed up on his head. Alone for once, no entourage, no music, no champagne glass in hand. "McAllister," Eli began, voice quiet, "I came to apologize." The crowd hushed. Frank regarded the younger man steadily, saying nothing. "I didn't know," Eli continued. "Didn't know about your service. Didn't know what that boat meant. I acted like a complete—" He exhaled sharply, searching for the right word. "Fool." Frank tilted his head slightly. "A man learns best when the lesson's hard." Eli gave a rueful half smile. "Yeah, well, I brought this." He held out a slim envelope. "It's a blank check. Whatever you think is fair to cover the boat, the loss, all of it. Just say the number." Frank looked at the envelope but didn't reach for it. Money won't rebuild what was lost. Eli's shoulders slumped slightly. "Then tell me what will—" "Please." For a moment, Frank said nothing. Then he turned, glancing at the dock where he used to tie up the harbor angel. His voice, when it came, was quiet but firm. "There's a bench down by the point," Frank said. "Wood's rotted through. Replace it. Put a plaque on it, 3 words. His gaze returned to Eli. "Remember the quiet." Eli frowned, confused. "That's all. That's all." By the next morning, Eli Grayson was at the point with a work crew, sleeves rolled up, helping remove the old bench. Townspeople watched, some with suspicion, some with curiosity, as the billionaire hauled lumber, sweated through his designer t-shirt, and hammered the new bench into place. A small bronze plaque was set in the center, its lettering simple and unadorned. "Remember the quiet." Words spread quickly. Reporters came. News vans rolled in. The story went national. Veteran declines. Fortune asked for memorial. Bench commentators debated whether Frank had been too forgiving, too modest, too old-fashioned, but none could deny the quiet dignity of the man at the center of it all. Frank returned to his usual spot at the dock, and something in Havenport shifted. Fishermen who had been pushed to the margins by the influx of luxury boats were greeted with new respect. Tourists paused at the bench to read the inscription and ask about the man who had inspired it. And the children, perhaps the most surprising of all, began gathering at the dock after school, drawn to Frank's stories, his knots, and his patient guidance. On a cool afternoon 1 week later, Frank sat on the new bench, a length of rope in hand, showing 3 boys and a girl how to tie a bowline. "Been saving sailors since Columbus," he said as he guided their small fingers through the loops. A girl with dark hair and a thoughtful expression looked up at him. "Mr. Frank, are you angry at the man who broke your boat?" Frank paused, the rope resting in his lap. He considered the question carefully. "No," he said at last. "If not for him, none of you would be sitting here right now." The children exchanged thoughtful glances, understanding in a way only children can. Frank leaned back, watching the harbor as the sun dipped low, the water gleaming gold, and for the first time in many days a faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. 1 week later, the harbor was alive with the familiar sounds of gulls calling waves, slapping against the docks, and the chatter of townsfolk going about their day. Frank McAllister sat quietly on the new bench, overlooking his old mooring spot. The words "Remember the Quiet" gleaming softly on the plaque. His hands moved over a length of rope, showing a group of children how to tie a proper clove hitch. Not too tight, not too loose. Frank said, his fingers guiding theirs. "You want it to hold, but you also want to respect the rope." The children leaned in wide-eyed and focused, absorbing every word. Parents watched nearby, smiling grateful for the unexpected bond their kids had formed with the old sailor on the dock. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, Frank's grandson, David, appeared at the end of the dock, a curious expression on his face. Grandpa David called, a grin tugging at his mouth. "Come with me. We've got something for you." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what kind of trouble have you cooked up now?" David chuckled. "Just come." With a little help from David, Frank rose from the bench and followed him down the dock. The children trailed after them, whispering and giggling as if in on a secret. As they reached the marina's edge, Frank stopped short. Out on the water, slowly approaching the dock, was a newly built wooden boat, sleek, polished, and unmistakably familiar. The lines, the curves, the craftsmanship. It was the Harbor Angel reborn. Frank's breath caught in his throat. "She's not exactly the same," David said quietly, "but we found your old plans in the shed." The local boat builders pitched in, the veterans groups donated materials, and some of the Navy guys even came back to help. "We added a few modern touches, radar lights, you know. But it's your boat." Grandpa Frank stood frozen as the vessel eased up to the dock, her American flag already flying proudly at the stern. His weathered hands reached out, trembling slightly as they touched the polished rail. A voice called from the deck. "Permission to come aboard." Chief Frank looked up to see a Navy officer standing at the helm, grinning. He nodded once, a lump rising in his throat. "Permission granted," Frank managed. The crowd that had gathered on the dock burst into applause, cheers filling the harbor air. Tourists clapped, fishermen raised their caps, and even a few of Eli Grayson's yacht guests stood watching, hands shading their eyes. Eli himself stood further down the dock, quiet, watching, with an expression Frank couldn't quite read, something between admiration and a humility Eli hadn't known how to show before. Frank stepped aboard slowly, his hand trailing along the rail, his feet finding their place on the familiar deck. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the gentle creak of the wood, the whisper of the water. For the first time since the crash, the empty space in his chest began to feel whole again. David climbed aboard after him, grinning. "We couldn't let you stay on land forever, Grandpa," he said. Frank chuckled softly. "No, I suppose you couldn't." That evening, as the sun slipped behind the horizon, Frank took the Harbor Angel out for her first sail. Families gathered on the dock to watch the children waving enthusiastically as the little boat moved gracefully through the water. David stood at the end of the dock, his arm draped over Eli's shoulder, an unexpected friendship growing between two men from very different worlds. As Frank sailed past the bench on the point, he caught sight of the bronze plaque shining in the last light of day. He smiled softly, adjusting the tiller with one hand, the other resting briefly on the flag flying at the stern. From the shore, a young father crouched beside his daughter, pointing toward the boat. "See that man," he told her. "He's the reason we have this bench and that boat. It's more than just wood and sails. It's a piece of this town." The little girl squinted into the fading light. "Is he a hero, Daddy?" The father smiled. "Yes, sweetheart, he is." Frank turned his gaze toward the open water, the stars beginning to prick the darkening sky above him. The breeze filled the sails, the boat leaning gently into the wind. Alone at the helm, Frank let out a long breath, his heart full, his mind at peace. He had never asked to be remembered, but now at last he was not as a man who once served, but as a man who never stopped. As Frank guided the harbor angel back to shore under the starlit sky, his journey wasn't just about reclaiming a boat, it was about reclaiming dignity, belonging, and the quiet strength that so often goes unnoticed. In today's fast-moving world where fame can be fleeting and respect is too often tied to wealth or status, Frank's story reminds us that true character isn't loud. It's found in the small, steady actions that shape a lifetime in loyalty, sacrifice, humility, and service. For many older Americans, watching Frank's experience may echo their own a feeling of being overlooked in a society obsessed with youth and speed. But Frank shows us that one voice, one quiet life can still touch an entire town and even a nation when people pause to truly see. Now we want to hear from you. Do you know someone in your life, maybe a veteran, a grandparent, a neighbor, whose quiet acts have left a mark? Share their story in the comments below. What lessons do you think today's generation can learn from people like Frank? Thank you for spending time with us and for honoring this story. If it touched your heart, please give this video a like, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story we bring to life. Let's keep these important conversations going across generations because respect, gratitude, and human connection are timeless. We can't wait to read your comments. See you in the next story.